Hey everyone, welcome back to the Book Cave with me, Jenny. Today I finally have a video that I announced a while ago. I did a fairy tale book haul from the library sometime last year, and I have finally finished all the books that I wanted to read for this, and so I finally have this video for you today. So I started out with reading Irish fairy tales and legends, and this has 10 fairy tales from Ireland, and they're all very unique from other fairy tales that I've read, and quite a few of them are actually rather sad. We have Deirdre and the Sons of Usnech, which is a very sad one, as is The Children of Lur, and that is actually very similar to the Wild Swans in some ways. And then the last one is Tír na nÓg, is another one that's rather sad. And I do kind of like, at the end, there's a short paragraph that gives a little more about each story, and the one for that one, the Tír na nÓg, that is said that it is possibly an explanation of what happened when Christianity came, and that how all these things disappeared. That is just kind of like an interesting look on it. This does have some illustrations, and I feel like this is somewhere between a children's book and just like a fairy tale book, that has the fairy tales. And I really do like the illustrations. And yeah. And like I said, it doesn't have a whole lot. You got a lot that are just kind of like this. So it's a really good kind of like cross-reference, I feel like, that can appeal to both kids and adults. And it also has a really good like selection of the Irish fairy tales. Obviously there's a lot more than just these 10, but I feel like this kind of gives you a good idea of what the tone of them all is. And yeah, so if you like fairy tales, want to try to like get into different fairy tales, I feel like this is a really good start. So Beasts and Beauty is by Somain Chiani and is a retelling of 12 classic fairy tales. And these are all like definitely retellings. They all have a different twist to them. And I have to say, I really enjoyed the connection with Sleeping Beauty and Rapunzel. And then one of my favorites was Peter Pan. Just the ending of it, even though it was really sad, it really fit with the story. And Peter Pan isn't something I've seen retold a whole lot, maybe just like once or twice. And yeah, so we also have Red Riding Hood, Snow White, Jack and the Beanstalk, Hansel and Gretel, which was another really good one, Beauty and the Beast, Bluebeard, Cinderella, The Little Mermaid, and Rumpelstiltskin. And Little Mermaid was definitely interesting for its twist, as was Rumpelstiltskin. So yeah, again, if you like fairy tales, if you like fairy tales with more of a twist in particular, this is a very good collection to get. It is middle grade, late middle grade, young YA, so like some of the sentences are a little choppy, which didn't bother me too much once I got into it, but at the very beginning it did a little bit. So, yeah, just a little bit of a warning there that it might take a story or two to really get into. So, this is a collection of 7 fairy tales. We have Snow White, the Frog Prince, 3 Wishes, Toads and Pearls, Red Riding Hood, the 3 Great Noodles, and Hansel and Gretel. Now, I've heard of all of these. I don't think I've read truly any of the originals. I had not heard of 3 Wishes or the 3 Great Noodles. They were both fun. Overall, this was a fun book. It didn't necessarily add a whole lot to the fairy tales I knew. It did give a little bit more information, like Snow White's stepmother is actually given a name, and these stories were interconnected, such as 2 stories that have a huntsman, and like geographically, they're mostly set in a cold wood where nothing will grow, or right on the edge of that. So overall, it was definitely fun. If you like fairy tales, you'd like it. If you want like a more deep dive into the fairy tales, this doesn't really have it. I do like the author's note at the end, kind of explains why Emily Jenkins chose to do it this way, and that has to do with the fact, fairy tales were passed down originally orally, and so they changed with every teller, and each teller would emphasize different points, and so that's kind of what she did here, is take the basic story and just emphasize a certain point to kind of make a connection or answer a question she had, like, why would this person have done that, in the story. And yeah, this is also definitely, I would say maybe like somewhat middle grade-ish, perhaps a little towards like the higher end of that, just because there is some violence in it, as you would expect from like Little Red being cut out of the wolf's stomach and stuff like that. But it's not in great detail, so I think like an older middle grade reader, or a middle grade reader that isn't that sensitive to that, like in books, and they understand that it's not real life sort of thing, I think it would be okay for like that. So I found out that the library has a book called A Spindle Splintered, and then that is followed by A Mirror Mended. But A Spindle Splintered is a semi-retelling of Sleeping Beauty. It's set in modern day, and there is a young woman who has a disease that will kill her, and she's been obsessed with fairy tales. So for her 21st birthday, her best friend gets a Sleeping Beauty themed party together and gets a spindle, or a spinning wheel, I should say. And she pricks her finger on the spindle, and she gets sucked into a fairy tale world with Sleeping Beauty. And this is just a short novella. It's, I think, like 120 pages, and it does have some, like, black and white illustrations throughout that are quite pretty. I'm actually not going to be able to show you because I read it digitally, but just know that they are very pretty. And it has some good quotes as well. And let's see here. We have one that says, she says, I don't know when I start dreaming or whether it's a dream at all. What do you call the vast nothing between the pages of the universe? So that was very interesting. And then we have, again, she's in between the worlds. And she says, the void between worlds is nibbling at my edges, tearing at my borders. And that's something I really wish was explored more, is like the void between the worlds. But yeah. And then, so at that point, what is happening is they are looking for other sleeping beauties, because it turns out that these stories have been told so many times that there's many different sleeping beauties, women who are in that type of story, and they can all kind of like communicate. So yeah, it's definitely really interesting. I'm definitely interested to see with A Mirror Mended how that one goes. I'm going to assume that that is Snow White, but I'm not positive. So yeah, I'm going to read that one and then report back on that one. But as for this one, I can definitely say if you like fairy tales, this is a really good one to start with. And it is relatively clean. There is some cussing, but that's about it. And it's not frequent. I want to say maybe like 3 or 4 times throughout the whole book. So, yeah, definitely give it a check if you do like fairy tales. So I finished A Mirror Mended, which is the sequel to A Spindle Splintered, as I mentioned earlier. And I did enjoy this, and I was correct about this one being Snow White. I still wish that there would have been more of the multiverse. It tends to concentrate on just like the one version of the story and not really go into a lot of the other multiversal versions. And it also doesn't really give you a whole lot of answers on how this happens. Which, I mean, it's still okay. I did still enjoy it. I still gave it 4 stars. I just wish there would have been a little more. Although I do suppose with it being, just like a 100-page novella, that if you get those answers, you're not going to get as much characterization. And I do have to say the character work in both of these was really, really good. I enjoyed it. And I enjoyed seeing like the different types of character growth. And yeah, I again highly recommend this if you like fairy tales. And as with A Spindle Splintered, there is some strong language, but there is not too awful much. It's not like every other sentence or anything. There's, again, maybe 5 or 6 throughout the story. So it's semi-appropriate for, maybe a more mature, young-ish reader. They're kind of really hard to recommend because I feel like while the characters are adults, 21 in the first one, 26 in this one, that it's not necessarily going to appeal to people who are that age. It would appeal to, a little bit younger, maybe like 17, 18, I think would be a pretty good age that it would appeal to, maybe even like 16, and I don't feel like it would be horribly inappropriate for them. But if you are sensitive to language, this is probably one that might annoy you a little bit with that. I listened to The Sleeper and the Spindle by Neil Gaiman, and this is a story of Snow White and Almost Sleeping Beauty. And this was a very interesting story. I really enjoyed it. I really enjoyed the twists and turns that were put in there. And of course, being Neil Gaiman, it had some very, little creepy twists and turns and such, and some things that kept me guessing. And this was just over an hour in the audiobook, and I was really looking for the illustrated edition. It's supposed to be, very beautiful, but unfortunately my library didn't have that. They did have the audio, so I went ahead and got that because I'd been intrigued by it. And yeah, if you like fractured fairy tales that don't end up quite the way you think they are, feminist retellings, this is kind of more of a feminist retelling, I think. And yeah, it was just really good, and I recommend it to any really fans of fairy tales that are not easily creeped out. Because while it's not scary, there are plenty of creepy parts. And I do have to say, this was also narrated by a full cast, so that was really fun. And it has sound effects and music, and they were all used very, very well. And it was a really, really fun experience. And this is one that I may wind up actually having to get on Audible so that I can listen to it every now and then, because it was just that good. So I finished Nordic Tales, and this is folk tales from Norway, Sweden, Finland, Iceland, and Denmark. And it's split into 3 sections, which is transformation, wit, and journeys. And each of these has between 5 and 6 stories. So we have in transformation, this is obviously about creatures that were transformed from something else. And then we have wit, which is about obviously characters outwitting others. And then journeys, which is obviously about the characters leaving and finding something new, finding their fortune, something like that. So I did find this interesting, and I enjoyed reading these tales because they're not anything I've ever really read before. You know how sometimes you'll read a fairy tale and it seems like it's just a slightly different version of another fairy tale. While some of these really did have, those kind of basic things, for example, The Forest Bride kind of had the Swan Princess, Beauty and the Beast vibes, but it was also rather different, or different enough that, I did enjoy reading it, and it wasn't kind of here's just another Beauty and the Beast story. And each story has an illustration at the beginning, and they're pretty cute. We've got this little mouse in a walnut shell, and so I do enjoy this, and I definitely do recommend this series based on this book, at least. I do have Celtic Tales that I'm going to read as well, and I will let you all know what I think of that as well, and if I continue to recommend this series. So in the same vein as the Nordic and Celtic tales that I found Tales of India, And like these other books, this is tales from 3 different regions of India. You have Bengal, Punjab, and Tamil Nadu stories, and it's split into 3 parts of animal stories, Outwitting and the Outwitted, and Life and Death. Some of these were surprisingly violent for supposed to have been originally written for children, but I guess if you look at a lot of fairy tales, you could say that. And I did enjoy the illustrations, I did enjoy the stories, and I feel like, again, this is a good kind of glimpse into some different folklore. And so the binding is also really nice, as you can see. So, definitely if you're like a collector, these will look good on your shelves as well. And none of the stories are super long, so it's something that's, again, easy to read a story here and there and kind of get an idea of different folk tales from around the world. And I will be continuing this with some of the other ones that are in the series. I finished another book in the Tales series, Tales of Japan, and as with most of them, this is split into 3 sections. It is Journeys, Ghosts and Monsters, and Justice. And I thought these were all pretty good. And as again with the other ones, there's 1 illustration per story. It's in a beautiful edition, and I do like that a lot of these tales were more unique to Japan, although they did still have similar elements to fairy tales and folk tales that you'd hear otherwhere. But I do like that the ones that were picked were, relatively unique. And they did keep, like, local Japanese names and certain words for, like, clothing. And there's plenty of footnotes to learn different things. And, of course, Momotaro the Peach Boy had to be in here. That is, like, the most well-known Japanese folktale from my understanding. And yeah, I'm really enjoying this series. Right now I have 1 more from the library, and that is Celtic Tales, so I'm definitely interested to read that and see what I think of it. So I finished Celtic Tales, and this is split into 4, as most of the other ones are, either 3 or 4. This has Tricksters, The Sea, Quests, and Romance. And this was another one that I thought a lot of the tales were quite unique. However, I did feel like the Clumsy Beauty and Her Aunts, which is the very first story, that one felt very Rumpelstiltskin-y to me. But that was kind of a fun little take on it. And then we had actually quite a few that were unique, but they still have, like, the hero's journey. So yeah, I definitely enjoyed this, and I enjoyed the series. They're all very nicely illustrated with a single illustration per story, and I feel like they're all very fast-moving stories, and I do like the fact that a lot of these have footnotes to explain perhaps some, like, cultural words for, like, perhaps a certain type of dance or dress. And overall, I did really enjoy this book and the whole series. And as I've said in the other books, very nice presentation. And yeah, this was definitely a fun thing to pick up. So the final book for this video is The Turnip Princess and Other Newly Discovered Tales. And I did enjoy at least a good bit of these tales, even through the first part. And I did feel like the first part was quite a bit of just retellings of stories we know, like Ash Feathers was Cinderella, and it was kind of nothing really new to it, but they were still enjoyable. I do feel like some were kind of abrupt, and I did like the otherworldly creatures section that tended to be mostly about mermaids, and I found that kind of like really interesting how much of a influence mermaids were throughout that section. And I also enjoyed seeing the way that like religion tied in with a lot of these tales due to the time that they were told and collected. And my other favorite section was the Enchanted Animals section, which I felt like, those two were the most unique. Although if you are a big studier of fairy tales, you'll recognize a lot of the tropes, or even if you've just read a lot of fairy tales, you'll recognize a lot of the tropes. And I would say this is more of a collection for a fairy tale enthusiast rather than somebody just looking to maybe get into fairy tales, or even something to read to their kids, because I just feel like, again, in a lot of the stories they end kind of abruptly, and there are quite a few questions left unanswered. And while that didn't overly bother me, I could see how it's something that's like, but wait, what about this? What about that? And yeah, so I definitely suggest it if you are into fairy tales. So that's everything I have for you today. As always, thank you for watching, and if you like this video, be sure to hit the like button. And if you want to see more bookish content from me, hit the subscribe button. And I have my Into the Book Cave Discord linked down below. And I will see you next time in the book cave.